There is a moment, and if you are watching this, you probably know exactly which moment I am talking about, where you find yourself sitting alone, maybe late at night, maybe in the middle of a perfectly ordinary afternoon, and your mind drifts back to someone who hurt you, someone who left without explanation, someone who said things they never meant, or never said the things you desperately needed to hear. And instead of letting that thought pass, you pick it up. You turn it over in your hands. You examine every angle of it the way a jeweler examines a stone, looking for something, anything, that would finally make sense of what happened between you. You replay the last conversation. You analyze the last look they gave you. You think about the words they chose and the words they avoided. You wonder what you could have said differently. You wonder what they meant when they said what they said. You rehearse conversations in your head that will never happen. You write letters you will never send. You imagine scenarios where they finally come back, finally admit what they did, finally look you in the eyes and say, "I'm sorry, you were right, you deserved better." And you wait for that moment to arrive, because you believe, you truly believe, that once it does, once you get that explanation, that apology, that honest conversation, you will finally be able to breathe again. You will finally be able to move on. You will finally be free. That is what closure promises. That is what closure has always promised. And that promise, as beautiful as it sounds, is one of the most dangerous lies that the human heart tells itself. Welcome to the Heart Code. I am so glad you are here today, because what we are going to talk about in this video might be one of the most important conversations you have had with yourself in years. If this is your first time joining us here, please take a moment right now to subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell, because every single week we bring you deep, honest, transformative content about relationships, emotional healing, psychology, and the journey of becoming the fullest, most powerful version of yourself. And if you have been part of this community for a while, you already know that we do not do surface-level conversations here. We go deep. We go real. We go to the places that matter. Before we dive in, I want to ask you to do something. If anything you hear today resonates with you, if anything makes you feel seen or understood, please give this video a like. It takes 2 seconds and it helps this message reach the women who need it most. Share this video with a friend who you know is still carrying the weight of something unresolved. Leave a comment below and tell us your story, because your voice matters, and this community is built on the honesty and courage of women just like you. And if you want to go one step further and really support the work we do here at The Heart Code, you can show your love through Super Thanks. That button right there at the bottom of the screen. Every bit of support helps us keep creating content that truly serves you. Now, let us talk about closure. Let us really talk about it, not the way self-help books talk about it in neat little chapters with tidy exercises at the end. See, let us talk about it the way women actually experience it. Messy, painful, consuming, and deeply, deeply human. Part 1. The Mythology of Closure. We live in a culture that is absolutely obsessed with closure. You see it everywhere. You hear it in conversations, in therapy offices, in late-night phone calls between best friends. You read about it in every relationship column and hear about it in every podcast about healing and moving on. Closure has become the holy grail of emotional recovery, the thing we must have before we can truly be okay again. But here is what almost nobody stops to ask. Where did this idea come from? Who decided that the path to healing runs directly through the person who hurt you? Who wrote that rule? Because when you really stop and think about it, the whole concept of closure rests on a foundation of assumptions that simply do not hold up under scrutiny. The first assumption is that the person who hurt you owes you an explanation. Now, from a human standpoint, This feels completely reasonable. Of course, they owe you an explanation. You invested time, love, energy, vulnerability, trust, sometimes years of your life. And then something happened. And now you are sitting with all of this pain and confusion and no roadmap for how to make sense of it. Of course you want answers. Of course you deserve them. Of course it would be right and decent and human for that person to sit across from you and be honest about what happened. But here is the truth that nobody likes to say out loud. Wanting something and being owed something are not the same thing. And needing something and being able to get it from the person who hurt you are two very different realities. The second assumption embedded in the mythology of closure is that an explanation, once given, would actually satisfy you. That if they finally came to you and said exactly what you needed to hear, the pain would dissolve, the confusion would clear, the wound would close. And that is where the word comes from, is it not? Closure. The wound closes, it heals over, you move on. But think about the times in your life when you did get an explanation. Think about the times when someone actually sat down with you and told you why they did what they did. Did it always feel the way you thought it would? Did it always bring the relief you were looking for, or did their explanation sometimes make things worse? Did their words sometimes reveal things about them, about you, about the relationship, that were harder to hear than the silence had been? Did you sometimes walk away from those conversations with more questions than you started with? Because the human mind is not actually designed to be satisfied by explanations the way we think it is. The mind is designed to survive, and one of the ways it survives is by filling in gaps, by constructing narratives, by taking incomplete information and building a story around it that we can live with. When we get an actual explanation, especially a painful one, it often disrupts the story our mind has already built, and that disruption can feel like another loss all over again. The third assumption is perhaps the most insidious of all, that closure comes from outside of us, that it is something another person can give us, deliver to us, provide for us, that our healing depends on their willingness, their honesty, their decency, their courage, that we cannot be whole until they give us what we need. And this, right here, is where the mythology of closure becomes something darker, because it does not just offer false hope. It places the key to your freedom in someone else's hands, someone who has already demonstrated that they are not safe with your heart, someone who hurt you once and whom you are now trusting to hold the door to your healing. Someone whose cooperation you cannot guarantee, whose honesty you cannot force, whose presence in your life you cannot control. This is the trap. This is the cage that closure chasing builds around women, especially women who have already been through enough to know better, women who have lived long enough to have scars, women who have been hurt not once but multiple times and who still keep circling back to the same source of pain, looking for the key that was never really there. Part 2. Why older women are especially vulnerable to this trap. Now I want to speak specifically to you, the women who have lived a little, the women who are past 40, past 50, maybe past 60, the women who have weathered marriages and divorces, relationships that ended badly and some that ended worse. The women who have raised children and buried parents and rebuilt their lives more than once. The women who, if they are being honest with themselves, know exactly what I am talking about when I describe this kind of pain. Because there is something unique about the way this plays out for older women, and it deserves to be spoken aloud. When you are younger and a relationship ends painfully, there is a certain kind of resilience that comes built into the situation, not because the pain is less. Sometimes the pain is sharper when you are young, more jagged, more disorienting. But there is time ahead of you. There are other possibilities. There is a sense, even if it is unconscious, that this is one chapter and there are many more to come. When you are older, something shifts. the losses feel heavier, not just emotionally but existentially. A relationship that ends at 50 does not feel the same as one that ends at 25. There is more invested, more years, more memories, more identity wrapped up in who you were with that person. There is more at stake, sometimes shared homes, shared finances, shared social lives, shared futures that had already been planned in some detail. And there is less certainty about what comes next, not because anything is impossible, but because the heart has been trained by experience to be more cautious, more realistic, more aware of how rare genuine connection actually is. And so the pull toward closure becomes stronger, because this was not just a boyfriend you dated for 6 months. This was a life. This was your life. And when it ends badly, or when someone treats you in a way that is deeply unfair or unexplained, the need to make sense of it is not just about the relationship. It is about making sense of the years you gave to it. It is about trying to hold on to the idea that those years meant something, that you are not the kind of woman whose love can be taken and discarded without explanation. Closure in this context is not just about the other person. It is about you. It is about your dignity. It is about your need to believe that what you shared was real, that you mattered, that your pain is acknowledged. And I want to be very clear about something. Those needs are not wrong. They are not weak. They are not embarrassing. They are deeply, profoundly human. You are not pathetic for wanting answers. You are not foolish for needing to know why. You are a human being who was hurt by someone who was supposed to care about you, and your heart is doing exactly what hearts do in situations like this. But needing something is not the same as being able to get it from the source you are looking at. And continuing to seek something from a source that cannot or will not provide it is not persistence. It is a form of suffering disguised as hope. There is also another layer here that I want to name gently, because I know it is real even if it is rarely said. Older women who are still chasing closure sometimes carry an invisible weight of shame alongside the grief. Not just the shame of the relationship ending, but the shame of still being affected by it. The sense that by this point in your life, you should know better, you should be stronger, you should be past this by now. You have been through enough that this should not still have this kind of hold on you, and so you do not always talk about it. You smile at social gatherings and say, "You are fine." You tell your children or your friends that you have moved on. You carry this private obsession with what you lost and what you never got to understand, and you carry it alone because somewhere along the way, you absorbed the message that a woman of your age and experience should not still be this undone by a man or a relationship or a betrayal. I am here to tell you that that shame is a lie too, and it is a cruel one because it does not just add to your pain, it isolates you from the very support and community that might actually help you heal. Part 3. What closure chasing actually looks like and what it costs you. Let us get very specific now, because I think sometimes we use language like chasing closure and it sounds abstract. It sounds like something that happens to other women, not us. We are not chasing anything. We are just processing. We are just trying to understand. But let us look at what this actually looks like in real life. It looks like checking their social media every day, maybe multiple times a day, looking at their photos, looking at who they are spending time with, looking for clues about how they are doing, whether they seem happy, whether they seem guilty, whether they seem like someone who hurt you and knows it. And every time you look, you feel that quick little surge of something, not quite hope, not quite pain, something in between. And then you feel worse than you did before. It looks like analyzing every text message, every email, every conversation you ever had with them, trying to find the moment where things went wrong, trying to identify what you could have done differently, trying to locate the exact point of rupture so that you can understand it and somewhere in the back of your mind so that you can believe it could have been prevented. It looks like running into them or reaching out to them under the guise of practical matters, a shared responsibility, a mutual friend, an object that needs to be returned, when what you are really doing is giving yourself a reason to be in their orbit, hoping that proximity will lead to the conversation you have been rehearsing in your head. It looks like the 3 a.m. conversations you have with yourself, the ones where you work through exactly what you would say if you ever got the chance, the ones that are so real to you, so vivid and detailed, that sometimes you wake up feeling like they actually happened, and then the reality of the silence crashes back over you. It looks like not being able to fully engage with new opportunities for connection or joy because some part of you is still waiting for them to reach out, waiting for the explanation, waiting for the apology, waiting for the closure that will finally free you to move on, as if moving on is a destination you can only reach with their permission. And what does all of this cost you? It costs you time, the most irreplaceable thing you have. Every hour your mind spends in the past is an hour that is not being spent in the present. Every mental conversation you have with someone who is no longer in your life is a conversation you are not having with the people who are actually here, actually present, actually worthy of your attention and energy. It costs you peace, not in some abstract philosophical sense, but in the very real, daily, a moment-to-moment experience of your own life. You cannot enjoy a quiet morning because your mind is already running its loop. You cannot be fully present with your grandchildren or your friends or your own creative work because there is always this background hum of unresolved pain pulling at your attention like a signal that will not quiet down. It costs you power. Every day you spend waiting for someone else to give you something is a day you are not giving it to yourself. Every day you keep the key to your healing in someone else's hands is a day you are living as though you are less capable, less sufficient, less powerful than you actually are. It costs you your relationship with yourself. Because when you are constantly focused on someone who hurt you, trying to understand them, trying to reach them, trying to get what you need from them, you are not focused on yourself. You are not listening to your own needs. You are not asking what you want, what brings you joy, what direction your life wants to go in now. You are so busy trying to close a door with someone else's hand that you cannot see the windows that are open all around you. And perhaps, most painfully of all, it costs you the years that you have now, the ones that are actually yours, the ones that have not yet been lived. Because while you are standing in the past trying to resolve something that may never be resolved, the present is happening without you. Part 4. The psychology behind the obsession. Why your brain does this. I want to spend some time here talking about why this happens. Because understanding your brain is not just intellectually interesting. It is one of the most powerful tools you have for changing your experience. When you understand why you are doing something, you are much less likely to feel ashamed of it and much more able to work with it rather than against it. There is a psychological concept called the Zeigarnik effect, named after the Soviet psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik, who discovered in the 1920s that the human brain holds on to unfinished tasks more powerfully than finished ones. She found that waiters who were interrupted in the middle of serving a table could recall every detail of the order, but once the order was complete, it faded from memory quickly. The incomplete task occupied the mind in a way that the completed task did not. Relationships that end without resolution are, in psychological terms, incomplete tasks. Your mind, trying to be helpful, trying to protect you, keeps circling back to them the way it would circle back to a problem left unsolved. Not because you are weak, not because you are obsessed in some pathological way, but because your brain was designed to complete things, and this thing was never completed. The story did not have an ending, and so the brain keeps returning to it, rehearsing it, replaying it, trying to find a resolution that will allow it to finally file this experience away. This is also connected to something called ambiguous loss, a term developed by the family therapist Pauline Boss. Ambiguous loss refers to losses that lack clarity, losses where there is no definitive ending, no ritual of acknowledgement, no clear before and after. Grief has a ritual. When someone dies, there is a funeral, there are condolences, there is a socially recognized period of mourning. But when a relationship ends without closure, without explanation, without the dignity of a real conversation, you are left with a loss that is real and profound, but that the world does not always recognize as such. You are not a widow. You are not a divorcee in the traditional sense. You are just someone who lost something, or someone. And there is no map for where you go from here. And ambiguous losses, research consistently shows, are harder to grieve than clear ones, because there is nothing definitive to grieve against. The mind keeps hoping. The mind keeps looking for signs that maybe it is not really over, or that maybe an explanation is coming, because a clear loss, as painful as it is, allows the grieving process to begin. An ambiguous one keeps you suspended in a kind of painful limbo. There is also what psychologists call anxious attachment, a pattern that many of us developed in childhood long before we were aware of it. If you grew up in an environment where love was inconsistent, where affection came and went unpredictably, where you had to work to earn it or were punished unpredictably for reasons you did not understand, your nervous system learned a particular way of relating to love. It learned that love is uncertain, that it can disappear without warning, and so it developed a hypersensitivity to any sign of withdrawal or rejection, and a powerful drive to restore connection when it feels threatened. When a relationship ends and you do not understand why, that anxious attachment system goes into overdrive. It is not just your adult self that is hurting. It is that younger part of you, the one who learned that love is unpredictable and who never fully felt secure. That part of you is activated, and it is driving the closure seeking with an urgency that feels almost biological, because in some ways it is. Understanding this does not mean you are broken. It means you are human. It means your nervous system was doing its job, trying to protect you the way it always has, using the tools it was given. The question is whether those tools are still serving you. The question is whether it is time to build new ones. Part 5. The people who cannot give you what you need. Let us now turn our attention to something that might be uncomfortable, but that needs to be said clearly. Some people are simply not capable of giving you the closure you are looking for, not because they are monsters, not necessarily because they are terrible human beings, but because of who they are and what they are capable of. There are people who genuinely do not know why they do what they do. They have not done the interior work. They have not sat with themselves honestly and asked the hard questions. They operate on impulse and habit and unconscious pattern, and when they hurt you, it was not a calculated decision that they could trace back to clear reasoning. Asking them to explain their actions is like asking someone to describe a dream they do not remember having. They might try. They might even believe what they tell you. But the explanation they give you will not be the truth. Not because they are deliberately lying, but because they simply do not have access to the truth. There are people who do know on some level what they did and why, but who are not capable of taking responsibility for it. They are too defended, too fragile, too invested in their self-image as a good person. Admitting what they did would require them to face something about themselves that they are not equipped to face. So instead, They minimize, deflect, rewrite history, turn things around so that you become the problem, or simply refuse to engage at all. Asking these people for closure is not just fruitless, it is risky, because what you will get from them is not honesty. What you will get is another form of the same thing that hurt you the first time. There are people who know exactly what they did, who are fully capable of accountability, but who have chosen to give you nothing. Not because they cannot, but because they have made a deliberate decision that they do not owe you an explanation, or that giving you one would cost them something they are not willing to pay, or simply because they have already moved on and your pain is not their priority. This is perhaps the hardest kind of situation to be in, because it means the closure you are looking for is being deliberately withheld, and there is nothing, truly nothing, you can do about that. And then there are people who could potentially have a real conversation with you, who might even want to, but who cannot do so in a way that would actually serve your healing, because any conversation between the two of you is so loaded with history and pain and defensiveness and old dynamics that the conversation itself would become another battleground, another wound. I want you to sit with this for a moment. Really sit with it. If the person who hurt you falls into any of these categories, and the odds are good that they do, then what you are chasing is not just unlikely to arrive, it is structurally impossible. The closure you are looking for does not exist in the form you are looking for it. Not because you do not deserve it, but because the person you are looking to for it is not capable of delivering it in the form that would actually heal you. This is not meant to make you despair. This is actually the beginning of something liberating, because when you really accept this, when it lands not just intellectually, but emotionally and in your body, something shifts. The waiting stops making sense. The circular thinking begins to lose its grip, because you are not chasing something that is hard to get. You are chasing something that does not exist in the place you are looking for it, and that means you need to look somewhere else. Part 6. Where real closure actually comes from. Here is what nobody tells you. Real closure is not a conversation. Real closure is a decision. It is the decision to stop waiting for permission to heal. It is the decision to stop outsourcing your peace to someone who has already demonstrated that they are not a reliable keeper of it. It is the decision to stop requiring a verdict from another person before you allow yourself to be okay. Real closure is an inside job, and that might be the most radical, most empowering, most challenging thing I say in this entire video, so I want to say it again. Real closure is an inside job. This does not mean you are not allowed to grieve. You are. Grieve fully, grieve honestly, grieve as long and as deeply as the loss requires. The grief is real. The loss is real. The pain is not manufactured, and it is not something you can just decide your way out of. What you can decide is not to make the resolution of that grief dependent on the cooperation of the person who caused it. There is a beautiful piece of psychology here that I want to share with you. Acceptance, in the clinical sense, does not mean agreeing with what happened or deciding that it was okay. Acceptance means acknowledging reality as it actually is, rather than continuing to fight against what cannot be changed. It means looking at the situation with clear eyes and saying, "This happened. It was not okay. I am still here. And I am choosing to take my energy back from the battle of trying to change what cannot be changed and put it into building what can still be built." This is what real closure looks like for an older woman who has been through enough to know that life is not always fair and that healing does not always come packaged in the form we want it to. Real closure looks like sitting down with yourself and writing the things you never got to say, not to send, but to empty them out of your body and onto a page where they can be witnessed, even if only by you. Real closure looks like going to a therapist or a trusted friend or a support group, and letting yourself be heard by people who are capable of holding your story with the care it deserves, rather than continuing to try to extract that care from someone who already showed you they are not capable of it. Real closure looks like choosing, consciously and deliberately, to shift your focus, not by suppressing what you feel, not by pretending the hurt is not there, but by directing your attention little by little to the parts of your life that are asking for your presence, your relationships, your health, your creative expression, your sense of purpose, the things that are actually still alive and growing and worth tending to. Real closure looks like changing the story you tell about what happened, not revising history, not pretending they were a better person than they were, or that what they did was not as bad as it was, but shifting from a story where you are waiting for them to acknowledge your worth, to a story where you already know your worth and their refusal to acknowledge it says everything about them and nothing about you. Real closure looks like making peace with the mystery. This is perhaps the hardest part, and I will not pretend otherwise. There are things you will never know. There are explanations that will never come. There are questions that will remain forever unanswered. And somehow, you have to find a way to live with that. Not comfortably, not without grief, but with a kind of dignity that refuses to let the unanswered questions define your entire existence. Some things in life do not come with explanations, as some people in your life will never give you what they owe you, and continuing to wait for what they owe you does not make them more likely to deliver it. It only keeps you standing in the same place, facing the same door, knocking on wood that will never open. Part 7. Protecting your peace. What it means in practice. Protecting your peace is not a passive thing. It is not simply deciding not to think about someone. If it were that simple, you would have done it already. Protecting your peace is an active, ongoing practice. It requires intention, it requires structure, and it requires a willingness to be honest with yourself about the habits and patterns that are keeping you in pain. Let us talk about what this looks like in real, concrete terms. The first thing that protecting your peace requires is establishing clear digital boundaries with the person who hurt you. This is not punishment. This is not a dramatic gesture designed to send them a message. This is simply an act of self-care that recognizes the truth about your nervous system. Every time you check their social media, every time you look at their photos or read their posts or see them smiling in someone else's story, your nervous system responds. Your body releases stress hormones. Your emotional brain lights up with pain or longing or anger or some combination of all three. And that response, repeated daily or multiple times a day, is not neutral. It has a cumulative effect on your emotional state, your sleep, your concentration, your overall sense of well-being. So unfollow, block if you need to, not forever, not necessarily, but for now, for as long as it takes to create enough internal distance to be able to exist without the constant pullback. This is not weakness, this is wisdom. Wise people know that environments shape behavior and that you cannot heal in the same environment that is keeping you wounded. The second thing that protecting your peace requires is becoming radically honest with yourself about the habits you have formed around the grief and the closure seeking, the late night scrolling, the conversations you replay, the letters you write in your head. These are habits, and like all habits, they have triggers. Something happens, a song, a smell, a time of day, a specific emotional state, and the habit kicks in. The mind goes back. The loop begins. The way to interrupt a habit is not to shame yourself for having it, and it is not to try to force yourself to stop it through willpower alone. The way to interrupt a habit is to become aware of the trigger and to consciously choose a different response. When the urge arises, notice it, name it. Say to yourself, here it is again, the urge to go back. And then, instead of following it, reach for something different. A friend you can call, a piece of music that moves you, a walk outside, a book, a moment of breathing, anything that redirects your nervous system before the loop can complete itself. This takes practice. It does not work perfectly on the first try or the 10th try. But over time, with enough repetition, the new response begins to replace the old one. The loop loses its automatic quality. You gain space between the trigger and the behavior, and in that space, you have a choice. The third element of protecting your peace is rebuilding your relationship with the present. This sounds obvious, even cliched, but I want you to take it seriously because it is genuinely transformative. When we spend a lot of time in the past, replaying, analyzing, rehearsing, we become somewhat dissociated from the present. We go through our days on autopilot, present in body but absent in experience. The textures of daily life become dull because we are not actually here for them. We are somewhere else, in some other time, with some other person. Coming back to the present is not a one-time event. It is a practice that requires daily renewal. It means deliberately engaging your senses in whatever you are doing right now. It means taking time every day to ask yourself, what is actually here in this moment? That is real and good and worth paying attention to. It means building a daily life that contains things worth being present for. Moments of beauty, connection, purpose, pleasure, learning, growth. This is not about being grateful in a forced, toxic positivity kind of way. You do not need to be grateful for pain or pretend that hard things are secretly blessings, but you do need to be honest about the fact that alongside the pain, there is still life happening, and that life, if you turn toward it, can hold you in ways that the grief cannot. The fourth element is community. I cannot overstate how important this is, especially for older women who may have allowed their social world to contract over time. As relationships shift and children grow and careers wind down and the busyness of midlife gives way to something quieter. Isolation is the friend of grief. It is in isolation that the loops run loudest, that the unanswered questions feel most oppressive, that the voice of the hurt becomes the only voice you hear. You need other voices, real ones, people who can sit with you in the mess of it, who do not need you to have figured it out already, who can offer the kind of steady, warm presence that reminds you that you are not alone and not crazy and not as undone as the loop in your head sometimes makes you feel, whether that is a therapist, a support group, a close friend, a sister, a community like this one. Find your people and let them in. Even when it is uncomfortable, especially when it is uncomfortable. The fifth element, and perhaps the most powerful in the long run, is rebuilding your sense of yourself as someone whose life has meaning, independent of any relationship or any unresolved loss. This is the work of identity. Who are you when you strip away who you were in that relationship? What do you believe in? What do you care about? What makes you feel alive? What have you always wanted to do or try or become that kept getting deferred because the relationship took up so much space? These are not small questions. They are the questions that older women often find themselves confronted with after a significant relationship ends, and they can be terrifying in their vastness, but they can also be extraordinarily exciting if you let them be. Because the end of one chapter, however painful, is also the beginning of the most autonomous, the most self-defined, the most intentional chapter of your life. You have never been more yourself than you can be right now, if you choose it. Part 8. The role of anger and why you should not run from it. I want to spend some time talking about anger because it is one of the emotions that is most closely tied to the closure-seeking impulse and one of the emotions that women, particularly older women who have been socialized to be gracious and accommodating and slow to express displeasure, most often suppress or mismanage. Anger is not an enemy. Anger is information. Anger is your psyche's way of telling you that something was wrong, that a line was crossed, that you were not treated the way you deserved to be treated. Anger is actually a fundamentally healthy and appropriate response to injustice, and the absence of anger in situations that warrant it is often more concerning than its presence. But anger that has no place to go turns inward. It becomes depression. It becomes self-blame. It becomes the relentless self-questioning of someone who keeps asking what she could have done differently, as though the problem is always somehow her fault. And anger that has no structure to contain it can also become a kind of fire that burns everything around it, damaging relationships and opportunities that have nothing to do with the original wound. So what do you do with the anger? First, you acknowledge it. You stop pretending it is not there, or that you are past it, or that you are too evolved for something as messy and uncomfortable as rage. You let yourself feel it. You let it be real and present, and not something that needs to be smoothed over immediately. Then you give it expression in a form that does not harm you or anyone else. You write, you exercise, you scream into a pillow, you talk to a therapist. You do the physical work of moving the anger through your body, because anger that is not expressed physically tends to get stuck in the body, contributing to tension, pain, fatigue, and a kind of low-grade misery that colors everything. And this is key, you let the anger teach you something. What did the anger tell you about what you value? What did it reveal about what you will no longer tolerate? What boundaries does it point you toward that you need to build, not just in future relationships, but in the relationship you have with yourself? Because anger, properly processed, it does not have to be something you get rid of. It can become something you channel into self-protection, into the clarity of knowing what you deserve, into the conviction that you will never again wait for someone's permission to know your own worth. The woman who has done the work of processing her anger, honestly, is not a woman who is bitter or hardened. She is a woman who is clear, and there is nothing more powerful than clarity. Part 9. Forgiving yourself for what you could not have known. One thing that often runs underneath the closure-seeking impulse, but that we do not always name directly, is self-blame. The part of the closure chase that is not just about getting answers from them, but about building a case that this was not your fault. Or in darker moments, building a case that it was, because at least if it was your fault, it was within your control and therefore potentially preventable next time. So many women I have spoken with, read about, and understood through psychology and lived experience carry the weight of a silent indictment of themselves alongside the grief of the relationship. They think, I should have seen the signs sooner. I should not have trusted so quickly. I should not have loved so much, or opened so wide, or given so freely. I should have known better. I should have protected myself. And if I had, none of this would have happened. I want to address this directly and firmly. The fact that you were hurt does not mean you made bad choices. It means you were hurt by someone who was not safe to be with, who concealed things or behaved in ways that no reasonable level of caution could have fully anticipated. You did not fail to protect yourself. You extended trust to someone who was not worthy of it, and you could not have known that with the information you had at the time. We judge our past decisions with present information, and that is not fair. You made the choices you made based on who you were, what you knew, and what you believed at the time. That is all any of us can ever do. Holding yourself responsible for not knowing things you had no way of knowing is a form of cruelty to yourself, and it is not serving you. Forgiving yourself for not having seen it coming, for not having left sooner, for having loved someone who did not honor that love, for whatever specific thing your inner critic holds against you, is not the same as excusing or minimizing what happened. It is the recognition that you were a human being doing her best with what she had, in circumstances that were more complicated than they should have been. And perhaps more importantly, forgiving yourself opens the door to something that self-blame forecloses entirely. Trust. Trust in your own judgment. Trust that you can survive being wrong about someone without it destroying your capacity to be open again. Trust that the lesson of this experience is not that you should close yourself off forever, but that you should know yourself better, value yourself more, and choose more wisely the next time. Not out of fear, but out of the clarity that has been bought, however painfully, through everything you have been through. By Part 10, what peace actually feels like, and how to find your way to it. I want to paint a picture for you of what it feels like to have genuinely moved away from the closure chasing and into something that actually resembles peace. Not because peace is some permanent destination you arrive at and never leave. It is not. Peace is more like a practice, a daily returning, a muscle that gets stronger the more you use it. But there are markers along the way that tell you the work is happening, that you are getting somewhere real. Peace feels like waking up in the morning and having the first thought of the day be about something other than them. Just sometimes at first, then more often, then as the exception when they cross your mind rather than the rule. Peace feels like being able to think about what happened without the thought consuming you. You can hold the memory with sadness, even with grief, without spiraling. You can acknowledge that it was painful without being pulled back into the eye of the storm. Peace feels like your interest in their life fading, genuinely fading, not being suppressed. The urge to check on them simply becoming less frequent, less urgent, less compelling. Not because you have become cold or indifferent to the human being they are, but because your energy has found better places to live. Peace feels like having moments, and then stretches, where you are fully present in your own life, where you laugh without the shadow of the loss hanging over it, where you enjoy food or music or nature or conversation without it feeling like a betrayal of the grief or a performance of okayness, where pleasure is just pleasure and beauty is just beauty. Peace feels like being able to talk about what happened without it unraveling you. You can tell the story. You can be honest about how it felt and how it still sometimes feels. But you are telling the story rather than living inside of it. The story is something that happened to you, not something that is still happening right now. Peace feels like wanting something for your future again. This is a big one. When we are deep in the grief and the closure seeking, the future tends to feel either blank or irrelevant. Why would I plan or dream or hope when the thing I most wanted did not work out? But as healing happens, the future begins to come back online, not as a replacement for what was lost, but as its own distinct thing, full of possibilities that have nothing to do with the past. And peace feels like a different relationship with uncertainty. The unanswered questions still exist. They do not go away, but they lose their urgency. You can hold them without being tormented by them. You can say, I will never know exactly why, and somehow I am okay with that. Not because you wanted it this way, but because you have found a way to be whole inside of the not knowing, because you have stopped requiring the answer in order to be okay. That is peace, not the absence of pain, but the presence of sufficiency. The knowledge that you have what you need inside yourself, in your community, in your connection to something larger than any one relationship, to keep going, to keep growing, to keep living the life that is still remarkably and beautifully yours. Part 11, a letter to the woman who is still waiting if you are still in it, still in the thick of the closure seeking, still waiting for the call that does not come, still running the loops at 3 in the morning, still checking the phone, hoping for something that resolves this. I want to speak directly to you right now. You're not doing anything wrong by being where you are. You are not behind schedule. You are not failing at healing. You are in the middle of it, and the middle is always the hardest part. But I want you to hear this, and I want you to really let it in. The call is probably not coming. The apology is probably not coming. The conversation where they finally take full responsibility and acknowledge what they put you through and say the exact words that would allow your heart to release. It is probably not coming. And the longer you wait for it, the more of your life you are spending in a waiting room for a doctor who is not going to see you. You have waited long enough, not because your pain does not deserve acknowledgement. It does profoundly. But because the acknowledgement it deserves is not going to come from them. It is going to have to come from you, from the people around you who love you, from the community of other women who understand what it means to carry this kind of loss. You deserve peace. Not when they give it to you, not after you get your answers, not once the questions are resolved. Now, you deserve peace now in this body, in this life, on this ordinary day that belongs entirely to you. And the beginning of that peace is the decision to stop looking for it in a place it does not live. Let yourself have this. Let yourself stop fighting. Let yourself lay down the need to understand and the need to be understood by someone who does not have the capacity to offer that understanding, and let the people and the practices and the quiet moments of your own presence be enough for now. You are not defined by what you lost. You are not defined by what was done to you. You are not defined by the fact that someone could not love you well. You are defined by how you choose to live from here. And that choice, that extraordinary, powerful human choice, belongs entirely to you. Part 12. The gifts on the other side. I want to close the main content of this video by talking about something that tends to be invisible when you are in the middle of the grief, but that becomes clearer as you move through it. The gifts that are waiting for you on the other side of letting go. When you stop chasing closure and start protecting your peace, something unexpected begins to happen. You start to come back to yourself, not the self you were before the relationship. That person is gone, and that is not necessarily a loss, but a version of yourself that is more integrated, more honest, more clear-eyed than before. A version that knows something about loss and survival, and the terrifying but liberating reality of being fully responsible for your own well-being. You start to notice things you had stopped noticing. The quality of light in the early morning, the particular pleasure of a meal made exactly the way you like it, the comfort of a friendship that has no agenda, the satisfaction of a creative project that exists purely for the joy of it. These are not consolation prizes. These are the actual texture of a life well lived. You start to have the kind of relationships with friends, with family, with new people who enter your life that are built on a different foundation than before. Not the foundation of need or fear or the hope that someone else will make you whole. The foundation of genuine enjoyment, mutual respect, and the pleasure of connection between two people who are already whole. You start to develop a relationship with yourself that is honest and kind and increasingly trusting. You know yourself better now than you did before. You know what you need and what you can no longer accept. You know the signs you ignored before, and you know that you will not ignore them again. Not because you are closed off, but because you are more awake than you have ever been. And perhaps most profoundly, you start to develop a kind of groundedness that does not depend on external circumstances to hold you, a sense of internal stability that has been earned through the very experience of surviving something hard. You know now, in a way that goes deeper than words, that you can weather loss. You have already done it. You came through something you did not think you would come through, and you are still here, still learning, still choosing to engage with your life. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, extraordinary. We have covered a tremendous amount of ground today, and I am so grateful that you stayed with me through all of it. If this video has stirred something in you, if it has named something you have been carrying without quite having the words for it, I want you to know that you are not alone, and that stirring is the beginning of something. Before you go, I want to ask you to do a few things. First, please give this video a like right now. That small act makes an enormous difference in getting this message to the women who need it most. There are women out there right now who are sitting in that waiting room, waiting for a call that is not coming, and this video might be the thing that reaches them if you help it travel a little further into the world. So please click that like button. Second, I would genuinely love to hear from you in the comments below. Tell me where you are in your journey. Are you still in the middle of the closure seeking? Have you found your way through? Is there something specific from what we talked about today that landed for you, or something you want to push back on, or a question that is still sitting with you? This community is built on honest conversation, and your voice belongs here. So please leave a comment. It does not have to be long. It can just be a word or two that tells me you were here and this reached you. Third, share this video. Think right now about the women in your life who are carrying this. The friend who keeps talking about her ex. The sister who cannot seem to let something go. The woman you know who deserves to hear that she does not need permission to heal. Share this video with her. It might be the most loving thing you do this week. And of course, if you have not already subscribed to the Heart Code, please do that right now. We are building something here that matters. A community of women who are choosing every day to be honest about what they have been through and courageous about who they are becoming. We would love to have you as part of that community. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, and you will never miss a video. And lastly, if you want to show your support for the work we do here in a bigger way, there is a super thanks button right below this video. Every super thanks that comes in goes directly toward allowing us to keep making content like this, to keep going deeper and more honest and more real in service of this community. If today's video moved you, if it helped you even a little, consider showing that love through super thanks. It means more than you know, and we see every single one. The Heart Code is a community built on the belief that every woman at every stage of her life deserves access to wisdom that honors her experience and supports her growth. That is what we are here for. That is what we will always be here for. You deserve peace, not someday, not once everything is resolved, not when someone else decides to give it to you. Now, today, in this life that is yours. Stop chasing what was never meant to come from outside you. Protect your peace like it is the most precious thing you own, because it is. I will see you in the next video. Until then, take care of yourself. Truly, this is the Heart Code, and this is your heart reclaiming itself.